A common research collaboration property is the length of time that a dataset will be held proprietary. After publication, the file is made public. This requires the ability to automate time-dependent access controls. Time-dependent processing of data collections is used for a variety of reasons, including data retention, access approval, use agreements, and access controls. For data retention, a data expiry attribute can be checked to see if the retention period has passed. For access approval, if an access approval flag is set, public access can be enabled on a file. For use agreement, if a user has signed and submitted a use agreement, their access can be allowed to a collection. For publication, if a paper is published, the associated dataset should be made public. In each case, processes need to be executed to change controls applied to datasets. For each type of time dependence, a status flag is checked, the access is updated, and the status flag is updated. We can use the data expiry attribute to define when access controls should be revised, or when we can add a new attribute on a collection or files. When the time period expires, we update the access control. Example rules include lifeline zone home RWMore rules, dmp-proprietary-change.r, and lifeline zone home RWMore rules test check retention.r. A rule to check the retention period is shown here and is available in lifeline zone home RWMore rules test check retention.r. The rule uses an input parameter star call to define a collection to check. For each file in the collection, the retention period is retrieved. If the retention period has expired, a message is written to standard out. The rule skips files that have not had a retention period set. The rule does not attempt to apply any processing to the file. Instead, the rule notifies the user that an action should be taken. A rule to decide what to do can then be applied. A rule to set access control is shown here. The rule is available in lifeline zone home RWMore rules DMP proprietary change.r. The rule uses input parameters star call to define a collection to check and star ACL to define the access permission to add. The rule checks the input collection name, gets the current time, and creates a query to list all of the files and their creation time in the collection. For each file, the rule checks that the retention period has been passed. If true, the access controls on the file are retrieved and searched for access by the anonymous account. If public access has not been provided, public access is granted. Take 7 minutes to complete exercise 84. For your research collection, change the expiration date on a file. You can use the ISYS-META-I command, set an expiration date to the current day, then find the file using the rule lifeline zone home RWMore rules test check retention.r. Please load a paragraph describing your result into the lifetime library in the sub-collection class INLS 624 by the end of today's class. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration manages climate records for long-term climate research. The NOAA Climatic Data Center, NCDC, is located in Asheville, North Carolina. Climate data records from around the country are sent to NCDC over high-speed networks for preservation. NCDC manages a tape archive that is highly controlled. No external systems are allowed to interact directly with the archive. Instead, all files that are either stored or retrieved are deposited on a staging area. This makes it possible for NCDC to control processing of the files before they are written to the archive and to control access to the files that are being used in research. Typical tasks include checking that climate records that are sent to NCDC do not have viruses, that the source is a registered data provider, and that data formats are appropriate. An archival information package can be generated capturing this information. There were several challenges with the original systems. Files were pushed into the archive from the staging area, and there's no way to ensure that the archiving was successful before the files were deleted from the staging area. NCDC published a paper at the IROD user group meeting on an approach that solved their data management challenges. NCDC set up a test environment to verify interactions between an IROD's data grid and their tape archive, verify federation of two data grids, and develop policies for managing the system. The original approach for managing ingestion of climate records was to have each contributor send datasets to a staging area using the FTP protocol. To manage the load, multiple FTP servers were provided, and the data were written to one of several servers through a load balancing system. This approach allowed NCDC to scale up the size of the staging area by adding FTP servers, but required detailed management scripts to move data from each server into the archive. FTP was also used to push data from the staging servers into the tape archive. The procedure had to loop over all of the servers, identify files to be moved, and send them to the archive. NCDC wanted to automate staging from the multiple servers, change from a push model to a pull model with transfers initiated from inside the archive, and manage deletion of data from the cache. NCDC developed a federated data grid approach to manage ingestion of files into their archive, shown here. The same concept of a staging area was followed. However, the staging area was managed by an IRODS data grid. The data grid managed multiple storage systems, supported data submission by the same FTP protocol that was previously used, and provided access controls on the data. A second data grid was created that interacted with the tape archive. A firewall was installed between the two data grids, prohibiting transfer from the staging data grid to the archive data grid. The archive data grid could initiate requests to the staging data grid through the firewall. This means that all transfers were initiated and controlled by the archive, greatly improving security. Through data grid federation, the archive data grid could initiate operations in the staging data grid to remove files after they were successfully written to tape, ensuring that datasets would not be lost if a tape archive was offline. This approach was extensible, making it easier to add storage to either grid as needed to manage load. The approach could also incorporate new technologies, enabling the same control mechanisms to be applied to new storage systems. The approach also helped ensure compliance with federal regulations for FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act.